Chapter 270 Beheading. Once Lu Tianming had died, the magic power supporting the several hundred small rods disappeared. In an instant, they dissolved into specks of azure light and converged together, forming a treasure talisman that gently fell to the floor. At this moment, all that was left was Han Li, Xuanyi and the blood-red spider. Xuanyi expressionlessly stared at Han Li and didn't make any movements. Han Li then looked at the blood-red spider and then looked at Xuanyi. He then silently raised his hand and brought out his white scale shield. Simultaneously, 8 streaks of white light appeared at his side. They were revealed to be Han Li's puppet beasts. Xuanyi's expression became slightly moved as he raised his hand to recall the small yellow cup. He insipidly said, "I truly did not think that Junior Marshal Han Li was actually an expert in puppet techniques. However, it seems you haven't cultivated it to perfection. Do you think with so few puppets, you could be considered my opponent?" When Han Li heard this, his expression didn't change. He only coldly asked, "Did you release the spider intentionally?" "Correct." Xuanyi bluntly acknowledged this. Then he flipped his hand and summoned a red muslin cloak. "Are you not worried about overreaching yourself and allowing yourself to die to this demonic beast?" Han Li coldly laughed after he licked his dry lips. Me? Die? Against a mere grade 4 demonic beast with a bit of toughness and brute strength?" Xuanyi mockingly said. Hai's face was filled with disdain and contempt. "Regardless, you should go and properly play with that crystal spider. Hope you'll be able to preserve your life." With that said, he covered his body with the muslin cloak. Although he was still there, all the sense from his body completely disappeared. Han Li was slightly surprised. He couldn't help but look at that muslin cloak several times. At this moment, Xuanyi slowly retreated to a corner of the cavern with a slight smile on his face. It seemed he didn't want to be involved at all. Han Li's thoughts whirled in his mind several times and guessed several uses of that muslin cloak. His complexion couldn't help but change, and he hastily looked at the spider. After seeing the blood-red spider stare at him with an ominous glint, he heard the sound of crackling come from its fierce teeth. It seemed he had already become its hunting target. After Han Li pondered for a short moment, his body flashed as he rushed toward the corner Xuanyi was resting. But when the blood spider saw Han Li move, its blood-red light brilliantly shined, and it charged towards Han Li. However, he had already prepared his puppet beasts, which opened their mouths, taking turns to shoot out light beams at the spider as it drew near. When the beams hit the red spider's body, it tumbled several times back. At this moment, it had no method to further pursue Han Li. When Xuanyi saw Han Li approach him at great speed, his heart trembled. He was greatly fearful toward Han Li's lightning-fast movement technique. How could he let Han Li approach him so near? He reacted by tossing the small cup in his hand towards Han Li. Then radiance shot forth from his body. A set of fire-red leather armor appeared on his body. Having lost its usefulness, the muslin cloak had been put away. When Han Li saw the giant cup barrier approach him, he waved his hand, causing a small mirror to appear in his hand. At the same time, a brilliant azure mist shot forth and immediately turned the huge cup back to its original size, halting it in midair. "Azure stasis mirror!" Xuanyi shouted in alarm. This was a famous top-grade magic tool from his own sect. How could he not know of it? Suddenly, Xuanyi panicked and moved erratically. He originally believed this heaven-shrouding cup would have bought him some time. However, it hadn't slowed down Han Li's charge in the slightest. How could he not be in a fluster? Fortunately, he was still over 30 meters away. Xuanyi took out an ice storm technique talisman and threw it out. It immediately turned into a dense barrage of ice spikes. He assumed that since Han Li would use his white scale shield to defend, he would slow down his movements, giving Xuanyi enough time to take out an impressive magic tool. When Han Li saw the barrage of ice spikes, a cold light flashed through his eyes, but he inconceivably waved his hand, retrieving the small shield into his storage pouch. At the same time, he suddenly increased his speed. His body became distorted in incomprehensible transformations and charged straight through the icicle barrage without the slightest of injury. When Xuanyi saw this, his calm expression thoroughly disappeared, his complexion becoming incomparably pale. In the blink of an eye, Han Li had already appeared in front of him. Lacking the time to use any magic tools, he could only madly pour the entirety of his spiritual power into his fiery armor and hope the defensive power of this top-grade defensive magic tool was enough to save him from the crisis before his eyes. Seeing the dazzling radiance released from his opponent's armor, murderous intent rushed forth from Han Li's eyes. He opened his mouth, and a black needle that had been prepared long ago shot out from his mouth when it was least expected, producing an extremely grim hiss as it pierced the air. It flew toward the opponent's armor with extreme speed, creating a world-shakingly loud clap upon impact. A huge streak of azure sword chi then appeared from thin air, and with a flash, Han Li was already standing behind Xuanyi. Xuanyi blankly stood at his original location. At the pit of his stomach, a fist-sized hole had appeared on his armor, causing the armor's spiritual chi to disappear, turning the armor to scrap metal. Then without warning, his head suddenly fell to the floor. After Han Li had suddenly broken his armor, he used an azure essence sword streak to immediately behead him. Naturally, Han Li had already taken his storage pouch as he passed by. Han Li looked at the storage pouch in his hand and felt an indescribable feeling in his heart. He was unexpectedly able to kill a late Foundation establishment cultivator. He had trouble believing he had just done so. However, Han Li clearly understood that the reason why he was able to kill Xuanle was because he had caught him off guard and because Xuanle was restricted by the narrow terrain. If it were a normal high-level battle between cultivators, Xuanle absolutely wouldn't have given him the opportunity to approach. Separated by a distance of over 100 meters and with the assistance of flying magic tools, Xuanle wouldn't be slower than Han Li's extremely limited movement technique and could move about as he wished. In order to destroy this person's armor, Han Li had to consume a single-use explosive magic tool refined from the fledgling horn of the inky flood dragon. It had been mutually destroyed along with the opponent's armor. When this fledgling horn was refined, the magic tool shop owner continuously felt regret. If the inky flood dragon had grown another 20 to 30 years, its horn could have been refined into an extremely powerful magic tool and wouldn't need to produce such a fragile consumable magic tool. But from what happened today, by allowing him to kill a late Foundation establishment cultivator, this item was truly worthwhile. After Han Li put away the azure stasis mirror and the small cup, a series of explosions suddenly appeared from behind him. This caused him to stop and instinctively react, patting his storage pouch. Several Grade 2 puppet beasts flew out from his pouch and blocked the blood spider's advance. A few seconds later, the puppets had been cut and gnawed to pieces. At this moment, the blood spider lowered its head and once again charged towards Han Li. Han Li raised his hand and sent forth his black dragon's grasp in its greatest size, stopping the huge spider in midair. Soon after, light beam attacks from his puppet beasts continuously shot at the demonic beast's blood-red body. It was eventually suppressed to the point where it was incapable of moving forward. In a moment of desperation, the blood-red spider sprayed out several spider webs from its mouth. Fortunately, Han Li had already seen the demonic beast use this before, and his body immediately flashed, avoiding it. As for the puppet beasts, although they weren't able to avoid being tangled in the spider's threads in the slightest, Han Li was able to instantly take the tangled ones into his storage pouch and exchange them for fresh puppets. The puppet's attack continued without the slightest of delay. Han Li immediately thought of using a talisman treasure but couldn't help but dispel the idea against this opponent. After all, using protective barriers and magic tools was unwise and would result in him being trapped by the spider's webs. With no better choice, Han Li let out a sigh and could only maintain his attacks against the spider. He didn't dare to relax in the slightest. After a quarter hour, it turned out as Han Li had predicted. The blood-red spider's body gradually lost its color, its shell beginning to show bumps. It was clear that this demonic beast's true essence was almost exhausted, rendering it incapable of using spiritual power to reinforce its body to withstand the attacks. When Han Li's face revealed a slight smile, the spider seemed to realize the situation was far from good and attempted to flee Han Li's offensive entrapment several times. As it attempted to leap to the cavern's exit, it was swiftly suppressed and pushed back by a burst of the puppet's light beams. In the end, it was actually restrained to one spot by Han Li's ever-changing entrapment. When the entirety of the demonic beast's true essence had been exhausted, it could only shrink into a ball without any power to counterattack. Han Li then took out the incomparably sharp silver-pointed sword and took several steps forward, beheading the spider. As expected, although the beast's external shell was hard, without any magic power to reinforce its body, its defenses were easily sliced through by the sword. Han Li finally sat down on the floor, exhausted. He remained silent for half a day. After a long while, he took a look at the dead cultivators lying in every direction and felt for the first time that the lives of cultivators were fragile. This caused him to feel sorrow in his heart. Would he also meet his end at the hands of another cultivator or end up in the stomach of a demonic beast one day? After he fully rested, Han Li first gathered the small rod treasure talisman and then searched through the dead cultivator's storage pouches. Finally, he approached the transportation formation with caution. His gaze continuously flickered between the rainbow skeleton and command medallion. Greater displacement medallion. That was what Lu Tianfeng called it. Han Li thought as he sunk into contemplation.